Hey, it's the Addy Queen, and in today's video I am going to show you how to turn scrap yarn like this into an afghan. In this video I will be working on tubes that are for a king-sized afghan. Depending on the size of your bed, you want to make different length tubes. For a California king, I do 400 rows with no tension. For a queen or full size, I do 300, and then for a twin bed, I do 250. So I suggest before you start laying out your scrap yarn that you want to use close to your workspace. That way it's easily accessible and you don't have to get up a bunch of times in the middle of your cranking. After you knit, your tubes will look much like this. We will be using waste yarn on the project, so you will have rims like this as well. For this project, I'm going to need 12 tubes, so I went ahead and knitted some before this video. Well, let's get started. When I go to start a tube, obviously I go to the black pegs. I'm starting with my waste yarn, that way I can use it later to sew together my tubes. I usually do 3 or 4 rows. If you don't know how to cast on properly, I also have a video on my channel about how to cast on. I'll do one row here. Alright, now I'm going to take my waste yarn. You can either trim it or leave it attached to the ball. I'm going to leave it attached to the ball this time. You put it to the left of your working peg and to the right of the first black peg. Drop it in and reset your row counter. Then you take your first ball of working yarn, put it in here, and make sure to leave a long tail. Like I said before, in this project I'm working on a king-size blanket, so I'm going to do 400 rows. Something I suggest, especially when using scrap yarn, is it is definitely okay to use smaller balls, but if you do, I suggest doing it in moderation, just because switching between smaller balls super often can be so tedious that it takes the joy out of working on a project. Although it is nice to use up those scraps, you also want to have fun while working on it. Usually when I work on scrap blankets, I use the whole ball of the color I'm working on. So this green ball was a pretty decent sized ball, so it's taking me a little longer to get through it. It can feed through the middle and I don't have to worry about it dragging on a table or getting in the way. And then eventually, yes, it does get to the bottom of the bar stool, but at that point I fold it up inside of itself and I have no issues at all. I feel like this just works better, especially for larger projects, just to keep your work out of your way. As you see, I'm pretty close to the end of my green. So I'm going to let it unravel in my hand the rest of the way. I'm going to open my yarn feeder, put this to the right of my last working peg, and grab my next color. I think I'm going to go with brown. And as you can see, this ball's a little bit smaller, so it'll go faster. this right here. Then I'm going to knit a couple of stitches before I tie it together. Then I just tie it like a regular knot. Cross them over in an X, loop it through, cross it in an X, loop it through. I also suggest when you're working on a tube to put colors that go together. You don't want a bunch of clashing colors. It just makes your project like not enjoyable to look at. At the end of the Another thing with variegated yarn, I have a lot of scraps that are just solid colors. So I try to do 3 or 4 solid colors before I use variegated. Just that way I'm not using up all my variegated yarn. And then doing some tubes with only solid colors. I just finished my 400th row, so I'm going to take some white yarn, do a couple rows of waste yarn. I'll do one more row just to play it safe. I'm gonna cut my waste yarn and put it to the right of my first black pig. And then to take projects with waste yarn off of the loom, I just keep going around. Do around 2 times with no yarn, and see your second time, it just starts to come off. Now that I've finished knitting my tube, I'm going to show you how to close it off. First, I always, let the rest of the tube go down there. And I hold it flat like this. You notice all these little blue loops? Across from them, they have a mate. I want to make sure my thread is at the very end, like this. I'm going to take my crochet hook. This is a size H. I'm going to stick it through a loop and then put it in a loop across from it and crochet. Loop, crochet, loop, crochet. You do this all the way across. And of course, after you do this to this side, you will also go back on the other side of your tube and close the tube and take off the waste yarn as well. loop, crochet, loop, crochet, crochet. This is a very classic example of why we use waste yarn in some projects, because these loops being out here like so easy to find saves a lot of time. Without waste yarn, you would be searching for the loops and trying to find a good place to crochet it together. And as you can tell, my waste yarn is already starting to unravel some, which is good. That is what we want. Got my last loop. I'm going to take my thread, loop it around, and pull it through, make a knot. Then I'll stick my needle back in a loop, loop it around, pull it through, pull it tight, and that makes a pretty sturdy knot. Now, on your waste yarn, if you pull the end, it just unravels. So we're going to pull all the waste yarn off. And voila! We have an end that is crocheted together. Now I'm going to take my tail, stick my needle inside of my project, go up and grab it, and pull it in. Then, you know, I still have a little bit left over, which I will trim later on. Make sure to close the other end of your tube, and then I'll show you how to crochet 2 tubes together for a blanket. The method I use to crochet these tubes together is pretty simple. I've already started on this tube just to show you what it looks like. Basically, you start with a slip knot, and then to crochet, you wrap it around your hook, go in one side, wrap it around your hook, clear your hook, wrap it around, go through the other side, wrap it around, all the bottom over the top. You're just going to do this all the way till you get to the other end, and you'll have a cute crochet finish. I do suggest that you use a color that complements your project because you will be able to see this crochet. Thank you so much for watching. Happy crafting!